Good afternoon. I'm Judy Woodward, the History Coordinator of the Ramsey County Library, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this Tuesday Scholar event. Our speaker today is Doug Omen, who will talk about Vanishing, Minnesota. Doug Omen is a well-known Minnesota photographer whose work was included in the Smithsonian Institution's exhibit entitled Barn Again, Celebrating an American Icon. Today's program is brought to you through the co-sponsorship of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute of the University of Minnesota, with the financial support of the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. We are deeply grateful to both these organizations. Thank you very much. And now let me turn things over to our speaker, Doug Omen, on Vanishing, Minnesota. Thank you.
Hi, Judy. Thank you for that introduction. That was awesome. And for all the participants, it looks like, according to my computer, that we're over 120 that have joined us today, which I want to say thank you to all of you. And we're going to have a fun 45 minutes to an hour long Minnesota adventure. So if you're ready to travel around Minnesota and explore the back roads in the history of our state through historic vanishing landmarks, I think you're in for a treat. For the past almost 30 years, I have been a Minnesota historian, photographer, but more importantly, I'm a Minnesota storyteller. And I went around Minnesota, and I still do, taking pictures of places that tell our story as Minnesotans. And I'm excited to share some of my travels with you today as we explore landmarks in Minnesota. I should tell you before I explain this landmark to you is I'm actually sitting in Idaho this morning, and I'm 2 hours behind you folks in Minnesota. So I've been up, I've had my coffee, and I'm in Idaho on vacation visiting. My wife and I are visiting our daughter and our grandkids. Anyway, let's get back to what I was telling you about vanishing landmarks. This is a picture that I took a few years ago. And if we were live, I would ask you if you could guess what this building was built for. But because we're not live, I want you to think about what you might imagine what this building, when it was built in the 1880s, was built for. And if you guessed it was a barn, it's not a barn. If you guessed it was a house, it's not a house. If you guessed it was like a boarding house or a hotel, it's not either of those. But it is a 13-bed hospital. And it is in the town of Starbuck. Now, Starbuck is out in west central Minnesota. And this building was the oldest and the largest hospital when it was built between St. Cloud and Moorhead back in the 1880s. So imagine if the walls could talk, what stories this particular landmark would hold. And sadly, if you go to Starbuck today to look for it, you won't find it. It has been torn down. So unfortunately, a lot of the landmarks that we're going to see today are gone. There are quite a number of them are still there, but our landmarks are endangered every year as it goes. My next landmark I want to take you to is maybe more familiar to all of you that are watching and participating today. It's a landmark that was not as old as this particular hospital, but it is this landmark. And at one time, there were 8 parks located in and around the Twin Cities, actually out in the western suburbs. Now, again, I wish I could talk with you in person and ask you if you've seen one of these, if you've driven up or down Highway 100, or what they used to call Lilac Drive. And these are parks with picnic tables and barbecue beehives. You can see one here in the picture that were very, very popular back in the 1930s. In fact, this particular landmark is one of only 2 that are still there. The rest have been swallowed up by urban sprawl, highway construction, the expansion of the western suburbs of the Twin Cities. But I'm so glad that the two bookend parks are still there today. This one here happens to be in St. Louis Park, and the other one that's still around that you can go see is in Robbinsdale. And I like this old picture here of families out enjoying the countryside. Now, when I think of going to the country, I don't think of going to St. Louis Park, Hopkins, or Golden Valley, or for that matter, Robbinsdale. But back in the 1930s, when people were really beginning to explore the open road and they would go out and enjoy beautiful drives, Lilac Drive was considered one of the most beautiful drives in all of America in the 1930s. But it was built by the WPA. And many of you know what the WPA stood for, the Works Projects Administration, or I like to kind of laugh about that when I say it stood for We Poke Along. But it took, to build this park, it was over 8,000 men were given jobs to build these parks that we can still enjoy, two of them yet today. Now, when I started my business back in the 1990s, I was a photographer of only one subject. It has expanded quite a bit over the years, but early in my career as a photographer, I focused on one type of building on the landscape, and that is old churches. Currently, I have photographed over 3,000 churches in Minnesota. And you might ask why I started photographing churches back in the day. As a historian, I believe that there is no one single type of building on the landscape that tells more of our community story than a church. Imagine the church you're looking at on the screen here. It's over 100 years old. It's down in southeastern Minnesota near the town of Caledonia. Imagine how many people over the years have entered that church and been part of that congregation for a period of time, and where they ended up in life or their families. Think about the impact of a little church, even like this one. It's made a difference in people's lives. So I love old churches. And again, it's that old adage, if the walls could talk, what stories they would have. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this church here. This is kind of a fun story. I remember hearing about St. Peter's Lutheran Church. It happens to be a little German Lutheran church. And I imagine some of our folks online tonight, or today rather, are of German descent. It's the largest immigrant group to choose Minnesota. Well, this particular German community built this little church back well over 100 years ago. And I had heard about the church. So one day I decided to drive out to the church to take pictures. And I had picked up my lunch in town and drove out to St. Peter's. And I sat down there right by the front door and began to have my own private church picnic. Not more than 5 minutes went by and a car drove up the road, and an elderly couple got out of the car and marched up to me at the church. And I remember the gal, she had her hands on her hips and she stood over me and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm eating my lunch, but I'm here to take pictures of the church." And I asked the couple, their names were Joyce and Raymond. I asked Joyce, I said, "What brought you out today?" And she looked down at me again and she said, "You." And I said, "Well, how did you know I was here?" And she said, "We have our ways in the country. So if you ever think you're alone in the country, you're not." Well, I introduced myself to Joyce and to Raymond, and they told me that they live in town in Caledonia, and they come out about every week, 2 or 3 times a week, to watch over their little church. And then Joyce told me something I'll never forget. We're the last 2 surviving members of this congregation. And she said, "We come out to watch over it because we're afraid if we don't watch over our little church, someone will vandalize it, tear it down, set it afire." And I thought about that, how our history is vanishing every year. Well, as I was visiting with Joyce, Raymond unlocked the door and he went inside the church. And a few minutes later, I was surprised when I heard this loud noise come from the church building. And I turned around just in time to see the door swing open and Raymond come driving out of the church on a large orange lawn tractor right out the front door. It was really funny. He idled down the mower and he said, "We live in town, so I just keep my lawnmower right here in the church. And look," he said, "I don't have steps to worry about. I can just drive right in and out." He went out to mow the cemetery, and I looked around inside the church. And I was surprised when I walked in. On the first pew you come to as you walk in, huge orange scrapes Raymond had misjudged over the years with his lawn tractor. Well, a few years ago, I went back down to Caledonia to see the church. And here it is today. This is about 10, maybe 12 years after I photographed it the first time. And I walked the cemetery that day. And near the gates in new granite stone, and Joyce and Raymond are gone. They had passed away since I was there the first time. And as I walked back to the church, I thought about what is the destination or what is the future of these little icons on the prairie. I hope someone of my generation, or even younger for that matter, will take it on as their mission to hold our pieces of history for all of us to enjoy and for our kids and grandkids to someday see. I'm going to tell you one more church story, and then we'll move on to another type of landmark. And again, I wish I could talk with you in person, but anybody have an idea what nationality this fella standing in front of an old country church happens to be? And if you guessed he was Norwegian, you guessed wrong. If you guessed he was Swedish, you guessed wrong. But if you said, "I think he's a Finnish man," you guessed correctly. And he is. His name is Dan, and he's in front of a little country church north of a very, very Finnish town in Minnesota. If you've ever heard of the town of Kettle River, that is where we're located here, north of Kettle River, Minnesota, at a little Finnish church out in the country. And I always tease people, I said, if you go to Kettle River today and you're not Finnish, fake it, because you'll be with a lot of great Finlanders. And I love the Finnish people, especially those that settled in northern Minnesota and out toward New York Mills and up at Monaga and Sabika. Great, great people. But I have to tell you why this fella's in the photo, because I typically don't photograph people. I photograph structures and buildings. And when I got there, I met this guy. I'd never met him before. I drove up, his pickup was there by the church. I introduced myself. He told me his name was Dan. Well, Dan and I got talking. I said, "What brought you up to the church today? What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, we're having a big Finnish celebration on Saturday. And my church is in rough shape." He said, "We haven't had it open for over 30 years. And he said, "We're having a big Finnish celebration on Saturday, so I have to get my church all cleaned up and ready." Well, before I knew it, Dan had pushed a broom in my hand, and he's barking out orders telling me to clean his church. After about 20 minutes, I finally got the courage to say, "Dan, I didn't come to clean. I came to just take some pictures. Do you mind?" I'll never forget, he put his broom down in the corner, came up to me about an inch from my face, and he says to me in his deep Finnish accent, he says, "Only if I'm in it." Would you argue with this man? I don't think you would. And I didn't either. So I snapped the picture. I didn't think much of the photo, to be honest. But he went back into the church. So I snuck off into the road ditch to get the photo I wanted all along. And this is a picture of his church. So after taking a few of these pictures, I decided to go back in and tell Dan that I had to get back to the Twin Cities where I live. And I walked into the church and he knew what I had done. How do I know that? He made me clean till 3:30 that afternoon. About that time, we got that church looking pretty good. I said, "Dan, I got to get going." So I said goodbye, and he caught me and he said, no, you can't leave yet." I said, "Why?" "You have to stop back at the farm, meet my wife, and you have to stop back for a bite." Now, when somebody invites you in Minnesota for a bite, what does that mean? Well, we all know what that means. It means some food of some sort, right? So he convinces me. I follow his pickup down a gravel road there in rural Carleton County, Minnesota. We sit at the kitchen table at the farm over the darkest coffee I'd ever drank and the heaviest zucchini cake I've ever eaten. We had a wonderful hour-long conversation about the importance of that little church. They met in Sunday school in the 1930s and in that church. So it meant a lot to them. Well, I had to get back, so I said goodbye to Dan and his wife. And I'll never forget, I'm walking back to my truck and I hear the screen door of the house slam behind me. And I turn around and Dan's wife is running after me across the yard. And she's holding in her hands a paper plate loaded with zucchini cake. I said, "What's that for?" You know what she said? "It's for the road." I'll never forget that. It's still in my truck. It's for the road. And the reason I tell that story, I love the church, I love the story, and I guess I really connected with Dan and his wife. But I realized how nice and hospitable people are in Minnesota. I have made a career out of traveling the back roads. And I tell you what, Minnesota people are absolutely the best. Now, this isn't a church, but it is a landmark that is very important to Minnesota and to every county in Minnesota. We have 87 counties in Minnesota. In every county, we have at least one courthouse. And you're looking at the oldest courthouse building in Minnesota. If you guessed it was in Stillwater, you guessed correctly. I love the fact is that we saved this historic landmark. Most of our courthouses that were built in the late 19th century, early 20th century, many of them are gone today. But this one is an absolute treasure in Stillwater, Washington County Courthouse. A few years ago, I did a book with the Minnesota Historical Society called Courthouses of Minnesota. And I went to every courthouse in the state of Minnesota. So this one is definitely a treasure. Now I'm going to show you a couple more courthouses. Here's one in a very, very cold town in Minnesota. This one is in Bemidji. Now this courthouse is typical of the style of courthouses that were built in the early 20th century, really about 1895 to about 1915. This is a style of architecture that we call beaux arts. It's a French term, and I don't quite know how to speak French, but this is a style that was popular in America for those civic buildings that we have today. And we have quite a number of the beaux art style courthouses still left in Minnesota. This is in Bemidji. And at the very top, now, the reason I took this picture in the winter in Bemidji, because I always tease those folks from northern Minnesota, that Bemidji has two seasons, winter and 4th of July. In actuality, Bemidji is a wonderful town. So I went back in the summer to photograph the dome of the Bemidji courthouse. And at the top of our old courthouses, in many of our towns, stands a statue. I'd be curious if you know who that is at the top of our courthouses. But if you guessed it's Lady Justice, it is Lady Justice. And she stands there with a sword in her right hand, the scales of justice in her left. But if you look closely, she's missing one of her scales. So that particular day in Bemidji, I happened to walk into the courthouse to inquire what happened to the scale on Lady Justice. And the gal at the counter there in the courthouse clerk's office told me it blew down in a windstorm and they still can't find it. So I made a joke about not being able to get a fair trial in Bemidji. It didn't land, but I thought it was still pretty funny. But anyway, it's a beautiful courthouse in Bemidji. But I have seen every courthouse in Minnesota. And my next picture is going to show you my absolute favorite one. And if you can see that, that is my favorite courthouse building in Minnesota. That could be a state capitol in some states. And it happens to be in that wonderful southern Minnesota town called Fairmont. Now, if you've never been to Fairmont, Minnesota, I would encourage you to go to Fairmont because it's a wonderful town that has a lot of lakes. We always think Minneapolis is the city of lakes, and it is, but excuse me, Fairmont has quite a number of lakes within the city limits of this great town. And a lot of times people don't realize that it does have that. But in the center of town is this beautiful courthouse, and it was built in 1907. And if there's a one day in history that I would love to go back for 24 hours in a time machine, I would like to go back to July 4th, 1907, Fairmont, Minnesota, at the dedication of their new courthouse building. You know what they did that day? Over 2,000 people came out to dedicate the new courthouse. Everybody was handed American flags. They hired a John Philip Sousa band to play. It was one of those optimistic days in American history, especially for the town of Fairmont, when they knew that they had built this beautiful grand courthouse. But the best part of that day, the ladies in town served over 2,000 chicken dinners to those that were in attendance. When's the last time you had a chicken dinner on your courthouse lawn? But Fairmont, Minnesota, take a trip this summer and go see it. This is not a courthouse, but it is a landmark that we almost lost in Minnesota. Thanks to the efforts of those preservationists in Duluth, Minnesota, we have saved Old Central High School. It was built in the 1890s. And when people come into Duluth, a lot of times they mistaken this beautiful landmark as the courthouse, but it's not. It's a high school. And I believe it's the grandest high school in all of Minnesota that's been preserved. Now, if you've ever been to Hibbing, Minnesota, they have a wonderful high school there, but it's a completely different style because it was built in a different era, about 30 years after this one was built in Duluth. But this is Central High School. A few years ago, I was commissioned again by the Minnesota Historical Society to do a book on schools in Minnesota. It was called Schoolhouses of Minnesota. So I traveled all over the state looking at schools. And I like schools, from the grand school like this one in Duluth to the small town schools like this one in a little town in western Minnesota called Donnelly. Now, the school in Donnelly is typical of those small town schools. 2 or 3 story buildings where all grades were in the same building, of course. And unfortunately, in the 1960s and 70s, when we consolidated schools, a lot of these went by the wayside. So you drive into small towns, I want to encourage you to try to find the old school buildings. And they're not hard to find. And most of them look in pretty sad shape, like this one in Donnelly. But of all the type of schools in Minnesota that I'm drawn to, not because I went to a school like this, but I'm drawn to these little country schools like this one. Can you imagine all 8 grades in a little building like that? I imagine there's some of our folks that are on the Zoom call today that maybe went to a country school. And again, if we were live, I'd love to hear or see a show of hands how many actually went to country school. At one time, we had thousands of these on the landscape, thousands. And unfortunately, all but one are closed today. Now, many of them are still standing. Some of them have been converted, like this one, into a town hall. Some have been converted into homes. There's even one in Otter Tail County that's a restaurant. So we've done pretty good with saving some of them. But if you imagine how many we had at one time, and most of them are gone. This one happens to be down in Nicollet County, between St. Peter and Gaylord. This is one of my favorite ones because it's the only one I've ever found that's been painted pink, and it's near the town of Wells, Minnesota. Now, Wells is a little town down by Elbert Lee, between Elbert Lee and Blue Earth. And apparently a local farmer had extra paint from his red barn and extra paint from his white house. And he just mixed it together and gave it to the school, and they painted their schoolhouse pink. And notice in the background, even the outhouses are pink. Of all the topics on the landscape that I talk about, and I have 33 different talks, and I give over 300 presentations a year, I get more requests to talk about barns. And I love barns. I didn't grow up on a farm, but if you travel Minnesota, as I have, and many of you have as well, you'll notice the wonderful barns that we have on the landscape. But unfortunately, every year, you'll see less and less of them. And they are really the symbol of our agricultural roots in America, are our old barns. This particular barn on the screen happens to be south of Waseca, down toward New Richland, I think is the name of the town. And it happens to be the only one that I have ever found of this type. And what I mean by this type, this is the only one that I know of that's a Sears and Roebuck barn. This was ordered through the catalog. In 1902, this barn was ordered from Chicago. It came to Waseca on the train as a kit, and then the farmer had to put it together. So it's a really, really neat barn. Every board, every piece of hardware, everything is stamped with a number, and you literally had to put it together. Somebody said at one program a few weeks back, they said, it sounds like it was built or made by IKEA. It's an IKEA barn. Well, in a sense, it kind of was for the time. So I love old barns. Here's a couple others here. How do you like this one here? This farmer went into poultry. This is a Gothic barn. This would have been typical from about 1930 onward. When the hip roof barn went out of style, this Gothic style went in. But notice down by the barn, the phone booth. There's a wonderful story. We won't have time to cover it today in the program, but why they have the phone booth down there. It's not an active phone booth, by the way, but it caught my eye from the road, but I stopped and met the folks. This is up near Mora, Minnesota. A few years ago, I stumbled on this barn, and this is an amazing barn. Now, I know the roof is gone. That blew off about 20 some years ago. But this stone barn out near Chicago, Minnesota, way out in western part of the state, is really, really a cool landmark. It's made completely of concrete and field stone. And you might not believe me, but I'm asking you to believe me. The haymow floor, the upper floor for the haymow of this barn is solid concrete. And according to the local story, a farmer, German farmer in 1923, and his two sons built this barn by hand. And basically, he was a stonemason, a trained German stonemason, and he built a ramp that went from the haymow level clear across the road, and the boys mixed the cement by hand in a hand mixer and put the cement in a wheelbarrow and pushed it up the ramp. And Dad trawled for 33 straight hours to pour the floor of the haymow. And according to the story, every load that the boys pushed up the ramp, Dad would test the cement to make sure that they had mixed it correctly. And how he did that, he dipped his finger in the cement and he tasted it. Can you imagine 33 hours of tasting cement? But sadly, they don't know what to do with this barn. It's so far removed from any major highway or road, excuse me, that they don't know if, people have said, well, make it into an event center, or do something like a wedding venue, but it's so far away. So it stands there kind of forlorn. Who knows what the future will be, but I love it. Whoops, I went too fast. I'm going to go back one picture. There we go. Another landmark that I love. This is a library. Now, you might be surprised, but this is the oldest existing library in Minnesota. It's in the town of Taylor's Falls. Now, the building was built in 1854, and it wasn't a library when it was built. It was a millinery shop. They made hats, which I think is kind of interesting. And according to the local legend, and I haven't been able to verify it, but they made hats for some of the volunteer regiments that fought in the Civil War from Minnesota. But in the 1870s, it became Minnesota's first public library. I think libraries are such an important part of our community landscape. Imagine the value if you could put an actual monetary amount on the value of a library. I mean, you can't do that, of course, but think about how many people have been positively impacted by our libraries. So I have traveled all over Minnesota. I have photographed every old library that's standing today. And I love the old Carnegies, like this one in Two Harbors, Minnesota. It was built, I believe the year was 1908, and that was during that early Carnegie era of library building. Now, Andrew Carnegie built nearly 1,700 libraries nationwide. You'll find Carnegie libraries in every state in the country, with the exception of 2 states. And if you say the 2 states that do not have Carnegies are Alaska and Hawaii, you will be half right. I won't say you're half wrong, but you're half right. Hawaii has a Carnegie, Alaska doesn't. The other state that does not have a Carnegie library in it is Delaware, our first American of the 13 colony states. But we had 66 Carnegies built in Minnesota, and this one in 1908 in Two Harbors, Minnesota. And it's interesting, his name is above the door. Now you might say Andrew Carnegie required his name to be on his library because he gave the town money, but he didn't. He did not require his name, but the towns were so thankful and grateful to get a library funded by Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate, that when the money arrived and they built the library, they put his name on it. It was not a requirement, but they enjoyed it, or enjoyed showing off that Andrew Carnegie gave him the money. I have photographed every Carnegie in Minnesota, but I'm going to continue with the library story with one last quick story of a library. There's a little town north of St. James on the way to New Ulm called Godall. Now, most people have never heard of Godall because basically this picture, you're seeing the entire town. It's a tiny little hamlet, but it had an old store called the Nelson and Elbin store. It was an early Norwegian cooperative store. So one day I'm driving up north of St. James going to New Ulm, and it was near lunchtime, so I decided to buy my lunch at the old store. So I walked in the store and I met the elderly gal that was working there that day. And I said, "What's new in Godall these days?" She said, "Nothing," of course. And then she caught herself and she said, "Actually, we now have a library." And I said to her, I said, I didn't see it coming in. She said, "Well, it's not out there. It's right here in my store." And I said, "Really? You have a library in your store?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Where?" She said, "Right around the corner." And I started laughing a little bit. And I'm afraid I might have hurt her feelings, didn't intend to. But I said, "That's your library?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, how does it work? Do I need a library card?" She said, "No. We're in Godall. We're on the honor system. Just take a book." And I said, "Well, if I took a book, you'd want at least my name and address, right?" "No," she said. "I just told you we're on the honor system." And then I asked one too many questions. I shouldn't have done it, but I always do. I said to her, "If I took a book, when do I need to bring it back?" By this time, she was exhausted with it. "When you're done," she said. I didn't take a book. I wasn't sure I'd ever be in Godall again, but I did grab my Coke and candy bar because I needed lunch, and she rang me out. Now, I don't know about you folks, but sometimes I want to live in a little town where the library is on the honor system and my cashier knows how to count change. Now, the Godall store is an interesting store, but this one's even better in my opinion. In a little crossroads town in Winona County, you'll find one of the last surviving country stores. In the little town of Fremont, don't you love the button sign above the, or underneath the sign? Fremont had high hopes of being a prosperous little town, never really took off. But I happened to stop at the store one day, and there was an elderly lady that was running the store, and it was her store. And I believe her name was Helen, if I remember correctly. And I looked around the store, and there was typical country stores with the glass cases, the potbelly stove. And, you know, I would say about these stores, they were kind of the Walmarts of the country. You could go to a store in Fremont, and on one shelf, you could buy a loaf of bread, an oil filter for your car, and a gopher trap all together. So I started talking with Helen, and I said, "Helen, how long have you been in the store? How long have you owned the store?" She said, my grandparents." Now, Helen was in her 80s, maybe close to 90. She said, "My grandparents started the store back in the 1800s. So I asked her, I said, "What do you do for security? You must have high-tech security here with cameras and motion detectors." She laughed. She reached behind her and she pulled out a Louisville Slugger baseball bat. She said, "This is all I've ever needed. Don't mess with Helen." So I asked her, I said, "Helen, I'm going to take some pictures of your store if you don't mind." She goes, "Oh yeah, take as many pictures as you want." I went outside and began to take pictures. And a few minutes later, Helen walks out, holding in her hand 2 bottles of her homemade root beer. Helen and I sat on the steps of the old store that afternoon and drank root beer together. It's one of those moments I will never, ever forget. Helen's gone now, but who knows what will happen to this historic treasure. But I had the privilege to meet Helen. What do you think this building was built for? It was built in 1901. That's not an address, that's actually a date above the sign and above the window. If you guessed it was a theater, you are correct, because the word Odeon means it's a Greek word, and it means small theater. The Odeon Theater is in a small town called Bellevue. If you go out to Redwood Falls, excuse me again, if you go out to Redwood Falls, you'll see a little town not far from Redwood called Bellevue. And in Bellevue is this wonderful vaudeville theater. It's one of the last vaudeville theaters and only one left in Minnesota. And vaudeville was one of those types of entertainment where they would travel around like the traveling circus, and people would come to see the performances. And it was always live performances. And towns from all around Redwood Falls and Bellevue would come to see the vaudeville acts. And here is a picture taken back when it was a vaudeville theater. And they would have these backdrops on the stage. They would drop down and the performers would perform on the stage for the audience. Well, something happened in 1927 that changed the Odeon Theater forever. Vaudeville was on its way out when the Odeon received their first movie projector. And their first movie they played was in the summer of 1927, the same year that Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic. It was the silent movie called Rin Tin Tin. Wouldn't you like to have been there in the audience for the first movie at the Odeon? I like theaters. I think about the entertainment landmarks that we have, and theaters always come to mind. This one is a wonderful example of a preserved piece of entertainment history. Back in the town of Fairmont, remember we were there for the courthouse. The Opera House in Fairmont is still being used today. It was built right at the turn of the last century in Fairmont, Minnesota. Now, most of us don't remember vaudeville, and most of us don't go to a lot of operas, but many of us remember on Main Street of our towns these wonderful Art Deco theaters. Now, I don't care what's playing at a theater by this name. The Cozy Theater, who wouldn't want to go to a show at the Cozy? It happens to be in the town of Wadena. And these Art Deco theaters were so popular all across America in the 1930s and 40s. And in some towns, we still use them like they do here in Wadena. It's still an active theater. And I love driving into main streets of small towns in Minnesota and seeing the old Art Deco theaters. And I have photographed many of them that are still standing today. But in the 1950s, something changed. We started going to movies in our cars. Do you know that in 1956, Minnesota had 113 drive-in theaters? Today, we have 5. We went from 113 down to 5. This one in Cottage Grove is no longer active and no longer there, but we're down to 5 left in Minnesota. And if we were live in person, I would ask you how many went to the drive-in theaters, and you'd all raise your hands. And then I would ask you how many remember bringing your friends in the trunk of the car, and we'd have some great memories of sneaking into the drive-in theaters with the whole neighborhood in the trunk of the Catalina. But what a piece of Americana in these old drive-in theaters. And if you travel around and try to find the other 4, actually other 5, one of them is going to be way up in northern Minnesota near the town of Warren, way out in Marshall County. And this is the only one of the 5 that still uses the old-fashioned speakers that you would put on the window of your car to watch the movie. And if you remember, sometimes people would forget to take them off. They'd take home a souvenir or a broken window. But nevertheless, the one in Warren is one of the 5 that is still active today. Another landmark as we travel around Minnesota that has seen its glory days, but I'm glad that in some cases, like this one in Fairfax, Minnesota, has been saved. There was a time when you could travel to pretty much any town in Minnesota on the railroad, and the rail traffic took people all over the state. And these depots became such an important part of our communities. And this one's been preserved, but most of them are gone today. But imagine the life on the platform of a depot. Again, back to that old thing I've said 3 or 4 times already. If the walls could talk, what stories an old railroad depot would have, telling the story of our past. And here is the only one left in Minnesota that I'm aware of. It is the water tank. It's in the town of Carver. And water was so important for the railroad, especially in the days of steam engines. Many times our towns were located where the water tank or the windmill and the well was built for the steam engines. A town would grow up around it. And that was the case of this one in Carver, Minnesota. I love old homes. They're a great landmark on the landscape in Minnesota. This is one of my favorite houses in Minnesota. It's in St. Peter. It's the Julian Cox House. Julian Cox was a soldier in the Dakota War. He was also a lawyer and later became a district or a state judge. But you can visit his home. It's a home that we in architecture call a Gothic revival. It's got the carriage barn, and it's really over the top, but it's really, really cool. I have photographed a lot of old homes in Minnesota. One only has to drive down Summit Avenue in St. Paul, and you will be treated to amazing homes and amazing history, or the lakes around Minneapolis and see some of the homes there as well. We don't have time to go into a lot of homes, but we have homes of famous people. In a little town called Elmore, right on the Iowa border, is the home that Walter Mondale grew up in. He wasn't born in this house, but he grew up here. And Elmore is so close to Iowa that you can do the dishes in Minnesota and you can throw the dishwater in Iowa. Walter Mondale, probably the second most well-known famous Minnesotan after Charles Lindbergh. Famous people's homes are fun to photograph, but honestly, they get a lot of attention. I strive to photograph old houses that will never make the architectural or the historical books. They're the old farmhouses tucked in the grove, off the main roads and off the back roads of Minnesota. And I have photographed literally hundreds of old farmhouses. And they are a landmark just as important as the mansions on Summit Avenue. Think about the families. Think about the activity, the life of these old farmhouses. Here's a landmark, a one-of-a-kind landmark. We don't have any others. It's the only one left. It's the only Civil War recruiting station left in Minnesota. 2nd Minnesota Boys, Company D, I believe it was Company D, signed up to go to war in the Civil War out of Dodge County in a little town called Wasioja. They were attending a college seminary on the outskirts of town when the war broke out in 1861, and they signed up to go to war in this actual building. Many of the boys never came home. Many of them lost their lives in the subsequent battles that the 2nd Minnesota fought in, including Chickamauga. And the little town of Wasioja never made it because of 2 things. Many of the boys didn't come home, and then the railroad decided to go south of town and never touch the town. A lot of our landmarks can be found in these little towns that didn't get the railroad. The railroad was so incredibly important to the towns. But here's an example of a one-of-a-kind landmark in Minnesota. People ask me, what is your favorite building in Minnesota? Well, that's really tough because I love, and I've only shown you just a small fraction of what I have photographed, but this Village Hall in Gray Eagle, Minnesota is near the top. If you know where Gray Eagle, Minnesota is, it's north of, and west of St. Cloud. If you go to let's say Albany or to Freeport and go north of there, you'll see and find the little town of Gray Eagle. But the Village Hall that was built by the WPA, it's one of my favorite New Deal era buildings in Minnesota. And I have photographed hundreds of buildings that were built during those work programs that FDR put together during the 1930s to put men and women to work and give them jobs. But the Village Hall in Gray Eagle is a landmark worthy of a travel or a trip to go see, maybe this summer that you guys can go there. We barely, again, scratched the surface of incredible landmarks in Minnesota that tell so much of our story as Minnesotans and as Americans. There's an old phrase that I like to wrap up the program today, and then I know Judy's going to take questions and we're going to be able to have some back and forth, which will be great. It's an old proverb and it goes like this: the best way to keep a trail alive is to walk on it. For every time you walk on it, you create it again. And think about that for a minute, folks, that a trail in the woods, when we don't walk on the trail, what happens to it? It grows over, as we know, and pretty soon it's forgotten. But every time you walk on it, you basically tell the story again. And that's exactly what I try to do in my career as a photographer, historian, and storyteller, is to keep the trail of history alive in Minnesota. I try to share, and again, I talk to over 300 groups a year. Most of them are live. Occasionally we'll do these Zoom calls. And I have a lot of different shows, but it's not really about that. It's really about telling stories about our past and using the buildings to help tell that story. The buildings are stone, wood, whatever building material that they used. And that is really important, but it's not as important as the story of the building itself. So keep the trail alive, tell more stories in life, and I believe we will all be better off. But this summer, I want to encourage you. Pack up the car and take a trip around Minnesota and get off the beaten track, get off the interstates, and see what the small towns and rural areas have to offer. Everybody has a cell phone now, so you have an instant camera, and they take pretty good pictures, by the way. And see how many of these old landmarks that you can find. And I think you'll have a wonderful trip, and you'll meet great people along the way. So remember, keep the trail alive of history. Judy, if you're ready, we can field some questions.
I am ready indeed. And I will say to the audience, now is your chance. We do have some questions in the Q&A line, but we have room for plenty more. So type your questions in. However, before we begin the questions, I just need to make a kind of announcement. I got a couple of private communications during the talk. Doug Omen has graciously stepped in at the last moment virtually to do this talk. But for those of you who were expecting the originally scheduled talk on the Asian American experience, I think there are some people who didn't get the word that the speaker for that event did have to postpone. For those of you who were interested, I hope that you stuck with us. I think you learned something different, but really interesting. If you are looking for other talks that Raymond Kuo, the originally scheduled speaker at this hour, has given for the library, you will find recordings of his talks in the link that I have sent to all participants. It should be in your chat line. I sent that link because also the first question today was, where can we get a recording of this program? This program is also being recorded. All of these links are found in that original program link that I put in the chat line. So I hope that removes some confusion. And, you come looking for one thing and you find something else just as interesting. So let's turn to the questions now. Yeah, the first question is, what is the link for the recorded presentation? And I've put it in the chat line. If you have any further questions about that, I think most people have my email address. Just go ahead and send me something. We got a lot of comments. A lot of people here had connections with one-room schoolhouses, including me. I went to first and second grade in a one-room schoolhouse in a different state. This questioner says, my great-grandfather, Peter Moody, had a one-room schoolhouse named for him in the village of Cambridge, Minnesota. Have you possibly photographed that one?
Was it actually in town?
I don't know. Maybe
Because I have done a lot of work up in Isanti County. That's where Cambridge is. That's the county seat. And there was a lot of great schoolhouses. Many of the folks that settled in Isanti County were Swedish, although there's a large German contingent there as well. But if I knew the name of the school, I could tell you if I have actually, if it's still there today.
Well, she seems to indicate that the school was named after him.
And what is his name again?
Moody.
Yes, wait a minute. The Moody School.
Original,
yes. I know where I know where the Moody School is.
Okay,
and I believe apparently it's still there.
The original name was Modig, M-O-D-I-G, and maybe they Americanized it to Moody. So
that could be. There's a barn over in Chisago County in the next county over called the Moody Barn. But I've done a lot of work in Isanti County. I love that county, by the way. That's great. No, I'll have to look where that photo is. It's probably somewhere in my collection. But when you have thousands and thousands of images, I need to go back and try to remember.
And just for interest, you mentioned that there is one-room county or country school still in operation in Minnesota. Where is that?
I should have said that, and I apologize for that, Judy. The last one-room school is in that little notch that goes into Canada called the Northwest Angle. There's a little town up there called Angle Inlet, and I went up there for my schoolhouse project, and I went and I visited the last one-room school, and it's still going today. But when I was there, teacher and 3 students when I went to visit, and they were all 3 brothers, by the way.
Yeah, right. Interesting. I think a lot of people have put comments in about their experiences or their ancestors' experiences in one-room schoolhouses.
Yes.
What are the current uses, this questioner asks, for Duluth Central High and Donnelly school buildings?
Well, the Donnelly School, I don't know for sure. I think the Donnelly School, the town is struggling. It's north of Morris. It's one of those little ag towns that's losing population every year. Now, Duluth, on the other hand, they actually run some community education out of the school, and they're hoping to use it for other things, for like civic events. Unfortunately, there's been some asbestos issues they've had to deal with up there with that building, and so it has some challenges. But a few years ago, it was scheduled for the wrecking ball. So the fact is that we have not torn it down is a really, really good thing. So I'm confident that the preservation efforts of those great people of Duluth, they will save this treasure and continue to find a use for it.
Okay. All right. And here's another reminiscence. This questioner or commenter says, both of my parents were born in 1929. My father grew up on a farm by Meyer in Carver County. He attended a country school until going to Waconia High School in 9th grade. My mother grew up in St. Paul, and when she graduated from Central High in 1946, she moved to Blue Earth to teach for 2 years at ages 18 and 19 in a country school. Wow. That
So,
school was turned into a corn shed by a nearby farmer, and for years it sat in his field about 100 feet south of I-90, heading out of Blue Earth. I haven't been down to see it for about 20 years. Have you?
I don't recall it,
Hmm.
but I can tell you that is such a great story because a lot of young ladies went into education at a very young age. They went to a 9-month normal training. They called it normal
Yeah.
school, and then they would teach, and they would have to. Most of them went and started teaching in rural schools. Eventually, after getting some experience, they would transfer because the money was better moving into town, and that
Yeah.
is such a great story. So a lot of our early education was on the
Mhm.
was done by those wonderful 18, 19, 20-year-old gals
Yeah.
that went to isolated one-room schools, and they literally were.
I don't know if you know the answer to this. Maybe this is a little out of your area. My children, my sons also went to Central High a lot later, of course. Was that the same building? Is that the same site? Has Central High School always been
In
in the
Duluth?
same place? No, this is St. Paul Central.
Oh, I don't know the story of St. Paul Central.
Okay.
Yes. That
Like
Central is in Duluth. Yeah.
This questioner's mother graduated from St. Paul Central in 1946, and I
Well,
just
I know
wondered.
it's a very old school,
Mhm.
not the current one that we currently have
Yeah,
along the
I
highway,
see.
but
Mhm.
St. Paul Central is one of the older schools in Minnesota.
Okay. All right. Now, a question, someone wants to know more about the Civil War recruiting station. She tried to spell out phonetically the name of the little town. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Could you,
Let me
where was it
let me
exactly
look on
again?
my phone.
Uh, it was in
It's
Dodge County. I know that, but I don't remember the little place.
it was Wazioja
Wazioja.
is the
How do you
name of the
spell that?
town. Well, that you
Uh,
uh,
you did it phonetically too, huh?
yeah, it's not far from Mantorville. Okay.
Okay.
And originally it was a law office.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And then it became the recruiting station for over 80 soldiers that went off to fight in the Second Minnesota.
Yeah.
And historians believe it's the last and remaining recruiting
Mhm.
station in Minnesota. So it is a really unique, and you can go visit it.
Yeah.
Especially they have events down there dedicated to the Civil War every couple
Mhm.
of years. They have these reenactors and a whole big deal. Somebody just typed it in. That's
Yeah.
exactly how you spell it.
Okay. Wait, I'm gonna copy that and type it in for everyone because
Yeah.
only you and I can see it at the moment.
Mhm.
Wasioha. Oh, okay. There you go.
It's an Indian
Thank you.
word for I don't know what it means, but
Uh-huh.
I believe it's a Dakota word.
I gotcha. Okay. And then the next question here, I don't quite know which barn she's talking about, but the person says, since there's time, please tell us why the phone booth is near the barn. Do you remember
Oh yeah,
which?
absolutely.
Okay.
I'll quick tell that story. So
Okay.
I drove up in the yard. I never had been to this place, didn't know the folks. And in Minnesota, when you drive up and they don't recognize the vehicle in Minnesota, they send the dogs out, and they did. They sent 2 dogs out, and then they came out, elderly couple, and I told them I was doing a book on barns. I said, "Do you mind if I take some pictures?" And they said, "Oh, take as many as you want." And I said, before I head down there, tell me the story of the phone booth. And the fellow began to tell the story. He didn't get 2 words out, Judy, before his wife standing next to him gave him a sharp elbow in the ribs and said, "I'll tell the story." And she proceeded to tell the story. She said, about 20 years ago, he came home with that in the back of the pickup truck.
Mm-hmm.
She said, I'll never forget. He rolled into the yard. I came out and I said, "What did you buy?" See, he had gone to a farm auction.
Uh-huh.
And he told me, she said, he said we'd use it someday. It's been down by the barn for 21 years. We've never used it. And the whole time she's telling me the story, I'm watching him. and he's just grinning from ear to ear. And I'm thinking to myself, she's kind of making fun of you. I don't know why you're grinning. She gets done and he says to his wife, well, honey, tell the man the good part. Yeah, he got it for $5. She said, the reason it's down there is because farmers see something that is a good price, they
Yeah.
can't live without, and they'll figure out the use later. And it's just an endearing quality of farmers. But that's why it was down by the barn.
That's a great story. Thank you to the original questioner.
Yes, for sure.
Where did the unusual design of the windows of the Gray Eagle Village Hall come from?
That's a great question, and I can't even make up a good answer for that. But you know what? I'm going to do some research on that because I don't know that either. But it is a wonderful building.
Could you? What is the design? I guess it must have gone past me. It says, why is it? What makes it unusual? Do you remember?
I don't, honestly. I mean,
Yeah,
I could click on the picture and go back to it if you want me to, but
well, let's see if we have time at the end,
yeah.
Why don't we go on? Yeah. Are there other famous Minnesotans whose childhood homes have been preserved that you photographed?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can think of, Charles Lindbergh in Little Falls, Judy Garland in Grand Rapids. You think of the August Shell House in New Ulm, Shell's Brewery. You think of out in Granite Falls, the Prohibition guy. Help me out, Judy.
The Prohibition.
The Volstead.
Oh,
house.
Volstead, sure.
The Volstead house is there. You think of the Mayo House in Lee Seward.
Yeah.
That was the original Mayo House before the brothers started the clinic in Rochester. So you can go to Winona to the Watkins house, where Watkins started down in Winona.
Is that the Watkins extracts?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, they now it's spices, it's medicines, it's food. Yeah, but the Watkins guy would travel around in their buggies selling their wares. You can kind of go to any historic town in Minnesota and you will find some old houses. Stillwater, for example.
Okay.
Minneapolis, St. Paul. I mean, there's so many cool houses.
Sure.
The Ramsey house, all of those.
And someone has put in the chat line the home, I guess the girlhood home of the children's author. I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name. Is it Wanda Gage?
Wanda Gog.
Gog. Okay.
Gog, right. And that's in New Ulm.
In New Ulm. Got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But there's so many, we could go on all day on that one, which is great because if you like famous people's homes, you will have a lot of them in Minnesota.
We got a lot of famous Minnesotans.
We do.
All right. Do you photograph old fraternal lodge buildings? Says this questioner.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that. I do. In fact, a few years ago, I was commissioned by the Minnesota Masonic Museum in St. Paul. They're off of Plato Avenue down there by the airport in St. Paul. And they commissioned me to do the Masonic calendar for that year. So I went and I photographed probably 30 or 40 incredible Masonic lodges and talk about beauty and talk about interesting architecture and story of the community. But there's not only the Masons, you have the Elks lodges, you have the Moose lodges, you have the Daughters of Rebecca. That was the affiliate of the Masonic for the women. You have, so you have these other ones as well. So lodge buildings are really, really cool. You even have some Isaac Walton League houses. There's one in Red Wing for the Isaac Walton, that environmentalist group that started back. So yeah, the lodge idea is really rich in Minnesota. We have a lot of them. You just have to kind of go out of your way to find them.
Yeah,
it's not something that a lot of people think about really, but you should, because they're really interesting. And those Masonic lodges, when you walk in, it'll blow you away how beautiful they are.
Mhm.
the artwork in them.
Can you talk a little bit about your methods of locating these buildings? You constantly are talking about things that are so out of the way that nobody would ever find them. Well, how do you find them?
Well, word of mouth,
Mhm.
saddling up in a cafe and start talking with the old timers, pretty soon
Yeah.
you get this rich information that you would never find anywhere else. Uh, but kind of working directly with county historical societies, which I
Mhm.
do. I know
Mhm.
most of the directors around the state, their county museums are such a rich treasure of
Mhm.
information. So,
Mhm.
and most of them have wonderful museums. So as you travel around and you want to find local history, find the local historical society for the county. I mean, you
Mhm.
can go to St. Paul to the History Center and it's amazing, but you will find a lot of great local stuff if you go to places that are about the local county.
Yeah. And I'd like to give a shout out. There is, of course, the St. Paul the Ramsey County Historical Society,
Yes.
excuse me, that we work with at the library. We also partner with the White Bear Lake Historical Society, and on occasion with historical societies from Maplewood, Little Canada,
Yeah,
and
local
Roseville.
community
So
historical societies. Yes,
mhm, yeah, yeah, and they're all worth it, and many of them do programs. So
they do.
keep that in mind, everyone. Okay, now we have a couple of questions about Sears houses.
Yes.
How many are still standing in Minnesota? This person says, I know there is one in Roseville. And I didn't know that. First of all, could you talk a little bit about what a Sears house was? And then
Well,
maybe,
it was, yes, obviously it was a mail order house
mhm,
and they typically were small. Now they had available larger ones, but most people that were ordering through the catalog wanted something
uh-huh,
affordable. We're talking,
mhm.
$300 to $400.
Wow.
Okay, it wasn't.
When was this that they were $300 and $400?
We're talking about between about 1895 to about 1920, 1925. That was the
Okay.
era of
Okay.
Sears homes. And
Mm-hmm.
Ward's had them too. But we always
Mm-hmm.
think of Sears as being kind of the go-to mail order house. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they were they were typically, like I said, they were typically small. They were built in neighborhoods, mainly in town. You didn't find them out in the country, like the L-shaped farmhouses, like I showed you that one in the
Yeah.
woods. That
Yeah.
that wasn't a typical. That wouldn't be a Sears house. This would have been
Mm-hmm.
one that would be built uh, in neighborhoods in some of our larger towns. For
Mm-hmm.
example, you'll find them in Hutchinson, you'll find them in Litchfield, you'll find them in Minneapolis
Mm-hmm.
and St. Paul, in the older neighborhoods. I can drive northeast Minneapolis up on the hill off of Johnson, and I can point out a few of them. And once you start to see some characteristics, the little
Mm-hmm.
porch, it's hard to describe without photos to actually show you, but
Mm-hmm.
um, and a lot of times I think it's a Sears house, and it wasn't. It was just the
Mm-hmm.
style of the time. Um,
Did all the Sears houses, were they all on the same blueprint? Did they all
no,
have
no, no.
this?
There
Oh,
was a
okay.
wide variety of
Uh-huh.
options. Most
Mm-hmm.
of them were two-bedroom, and some of them
Mm-hmm.
were three. Rarely will you find a four-bedroom Sears house.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but there's an actual club um,
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's in St. Paul. There might be an actual, well, I know there's a bungalow house club in
Mm-hmm.
St. Paul or in
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota. And there might be a
Yes.
Sears club too, that's what they specialize in. And they know where they're all at and whatever. But I've never
Mm-hmm.
seen an actual book or a guidebook on where they're at. I think that would be a really fun thing to put together. It could just
So,
be a folder of
uh-huh,
some sort.
when they sent you the kit, it was just, wood and nails
Oh yeah,
and
yeah. Everything, windows,
uh-huh.
sashes,
But you had to hire
yeah,
a
you hired a
carpenter.
local carpenter to put it
Uh-huh.
together. Yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
it didn't come with a handyman.
Hmm.
You had to
Right.
find
Right.
your own.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's kind of the same principle of Andrew Carnegie's libraries, where he funded the town. The money but a
Mhm.
local builder had to build.
Sure, sure. Okay, very interesting. All right, back to one-room schoolhouses. This viewer says, happily, the one-room schoolhouse near my home in Michigan was moved to a hilltop over a pond, was restored, and then turned into a beautiful home. Does this happen in Minnesota? Is this common in Minnesota, that the schoolhouses are repurposed as people's dwelling places?
It does happen. It doesn't happen enough, in my opinion,
Mm,
because because again, to move a building is expensive.
mhm.
And so that can be a bit of a challenge, but it's more, uh, it doesn't happen enough. Like I said, I think
Yeah,
sadly, in the
yeah,
1960s, we tore down landmarks
yeah.
all the time. We did
Mhm.
not have a vision for preservation like we do today. So I'm really optimistic that we are tearing down less of our landmarks today than we did in the 1960s and 50s. But
Mhm.
that being said, I have seen schoolhouses converted into wonderful homes. I've seen them turn into restaurants, into actual
Yeah.
boutiques and shops. So that's really, really cool to see. But the most common reuse isn't homes, it's township halls. That's what you see more often.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. That's actually what happened to the one-room schoolhouse that I attended
Sure.
in Bedminster, Pennsylvania. It's now a little community
Oh,
center
the
town
Keystone
hall.
State.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Next question is about the Sumter Library. That's in Minneapolis, I
It's in
believe.
North Minneapolis.
Yes, the Sumter Library has always been the hub of a diverse population, African Americans, Native Americans, Jewish immigrants at the end of the 19th century, and so on. Today, it serves a largely African American population as well as an immigrant population. Do you know much about its history? Have you photographed that library?
I have photographed it. It happens
Hmm.
to be an image in my book called Libraries in Minnesota. So you can
Hmm.
see the photo that I took when I
Is
was
that a
doing the project.
Carnegie Library?
It is
Uh-huh.
considered a Carnegie. And
Mhm.
it's in this wonderful neighborhood that has seen a lot of change over the years. And I think the
Mhm.
the person that raised the question explained it very, very well. What
Mhm.
that tells me is that the library, as neighborhoods change, the library's mission does not. It continues to service whoever lives in that particular neighborhood. And I think about my family immigrants that settled into Northeast Minneapolis. They were Swedes. And I think about when I go to that neighborhood today where my dad grew up, it
Mhm.
happens to be a lot of folks from Ecuador and from South America live in that neighborhood.
Mhm.
And the library, the parks are servicing are a benefit to those immigrants, just like my Swedish immigrants
Mhm.
120 years ago. So when you see these landmarks, keep them standing, because the library is a great example in North Minneapolis. The neighborhoods will change, and in the next 50 years, they'll change again,
Yeah.
but the library will not. It continues to be a benefit to those living there.
Well, thank you very much. I couldn't have put it better myself. I thank you on behalf of all libraries. And I want to say that the original questioner corrected herself. It did have it sounded wrong to my ears. She's talking about the Sumner Library
The Sumner,
in
it was, yeah,
North.
I didn't want to, I knew what she meant.
Yeah, I did myself, and I knew it sounded wrong to my ear, but it just kind of knocked the right thing out.
Yeah,
But
it's
she
the Sumner
put in
Library.
the correct.
It's right off
Yeah,
of Folsom Memorial Highway.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And then there is another famous person's house, apparently, on Summit Avenue, is a house that F. Scott Fitzgerald lived in for a while. Do you know about that?
I think it was on Grand Avenue.
That's what I thought,
I thought
actually.
it's Grand Avenue, but I could
I
be
think
wrong.
so too.
Uh,
Yeah.
but close enough, right? I mean,
Mm,
uh, and it's a brownstone, I believe. And I
I
did,
think I've
and I
seen the
did
house.
photograph it for the
Uh-huh.
Historical Society years ago. So it's been a
Yeah,
while. Could
yeah,
I
yeah.
find it again? I think I could, because I thought it was on Grand.
Hmm.
But Summit Avenue certainly, from James J. Hill, of course, but
Yeah, yeah.
the Burbank House and all the prominent Summit Avenue folks, the movers and shakers of St. Paul. You know, it's interesting that on that road alone, on that street alone, they all faced the avenue. They didn't face the river. They could have, but and turn the houses to face the river, but but the river didn't offer them the prestige as the avenue. So it's always fun to drive there and go. Can you imagine living in 1890, driving your carriage down the avenue? How cool that would have been. And that's Scott Fitzgerald is just one of those prominent Minnesotans, like St. Clair Lewis. And by the way, his house is there in Sauk Center as well.
Oh, sure.
But interesting, if I can just add to that, that there's there's an Episcopal church behind William Mitchell Law School that has a pew to another famous American that spent 2 or 3 years of her life in Minnesota, and that's Amelia Earhart.
Really?
Yeah, she and her family, they actually have a pew in that church, and it's the Earhart pew. So you can go see that.
In the Episcopal church
I believe
that fronts on Summit Avenue.
It's right off of Summit behind the William Mitchell Law School. It's not on Summit. It's off a block or block and a half to the
okay. Okay. All right. I know what you're talking about.
Little English Episcopal. It's a charming church.
Okay. All right.
And the Earharts went there when they lived in St. Paul, when Amelia and her sister were young, teenagers.
Oh,
so there's so much history in Minnesota. It's so much fun.
Yeah. Let's see. There was an earlier question. I think, yes, we overlooked this because I just wanted one thing to lead to another. But this questioner asked, what would you choose to photograph today that may be vanishing soon? So what it's not in danger today, but what will be on the vanishing list?
Wow. That's a fantastic question. That is a question that I haven't thought about very much, because we have a tendency to not look at the landscape as being important today.
Yeah.
But one thing does come to mind. In terms of housing, those 1960s suburban or 1950s and 60s suburban houses that just exploded, whether it's in Richfield, Bloomington, Edina, or Coon Rapids, or places like that, where they were these family, and they were considered substantial homes. They were built by builders like Orrin Thompson and some of these that built these neighborhoods of these rambler, 3-bedroom ramblers with basements.
Yeah.
And boy, if you could get an Orrin Thompson Rambler home back in 1962, you had arrived. And they laid out the streets and built neighborhoods. And we drive through them today. We don't think much about them, but in 50 years, they're going to be an interesting story. And how
I'll bet
the Twin Cities exploded in the suburbs.
Yeah. I'll bet a number of the people in the audience today grew up in just those Rambler type houses,
And they were, they weren't on Summit Avenue, but they were on a street, and it was that all-American 1950s, 1960s idea.
Sure. Okay, well, we've got about 10 more minutes. I'm afraid we've got more questions and time available. We're going to
I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay as long as you'll let me stay.
Oh, unfortunately, we can't. We'd love to, but we've got other commitments. But we're going to try to get as many questions as we can. So I'll start right in. Has anyone been photographing veterans-related buildings, from the GAR in Litchfield to World War I vets remembered, through all right up to VFWs and American Legion halls?
I have done quite a bit. In fact, the person asked about the Litchfield GAR. There's actually 3 GAR buildings left in Minnesota.
I think you should say what GAR stands for.
The GAR stood for the Grand Army of the Republic, and that was the veterans group or club, much like the VFW we have today, that was formed for Civil War veterans to stay in contact with their buddies after the war. So it was a clubhouse, basically. And we have 3 left. We have one in Litchfield, and that's the best one. We have one in Clearwater, south of St. Cloud, and we have one in Grand Meadow, Minnesota. There's only three left. But what I like about the veteran story is not only those three, but we have wonderful armories in our towns. And the armories are distinctive, really cool buildings. I didn't show any in the program today, but I have photographed most of the old armories that are left in Minnesota. And think about the gathering place, not only like the armory we have on the University of Minnesota campus, which is the old armory building that was the gymnasium for the Gophers back years and years ago, but in small towns, when the soldiers would gather before going out for the Spanish-American War or World War I and subsequent conflicts. But those are really cool. And veterans memorials in parks are really cool. You mentioned White Bear Lake the other day, or the other minute here, Judy, and they have a wonderful Civil War monument to a Civil War, to all Civil War veterans. So veteran memorial parks are really cool to photograph, and I have done that as well.
For those who are interested, I really should point out at this point that the White Bear Lake Area Historical Society partners with the library and offers a program every third Monday in the month on some topic of local interest to White Bear. They do an extraordinarily good job with their programs, and I really invite everyone who has interest in White Bear Lake history in particular to sign up for those programs, which are advertised on our website. All right. My grandfather, this person says, worked as a blacksmith in Coates, Minnesota. Do you have any photos of old blacksmith shops?
I don't have very many, and I don't have the one in Coates. I'm not sure the building is still there, but Coates is that little town down south on Highway 52 past the refinery as you're going down toward Rochester. And it's a great little town. I don't believe I have that one, but I have a little blacksmith shop in a small town. I believe it's Barrett out in west central Minnesota. They're hard to find. They disappeared so quickly, and they were replaced by early automotive garages. So it was blacksmith, and then it converted into garages. So a lot of times, if you can find an old filling station garage, its origins was blacksmith, and it was a natural transition to be automotive later on. That's a great question, and I don't have a lot of them. No.
Okay. All right. And now here is a viewer who grew up in a Sears house in the Bryn Mawr area of Minneapolis. The house was built in 1914, large, 5 bedrooms, 1.5 story, built on 1.5 city lots. This home is featured in the book Bungalow Nation. And I'm wondering, is it possible that the original house was smaller and that it was enlarged to present the 5 bedrooms? Did that ever happen?
Yeah, that was the thought that came to mind. That was it originally a 5 bedroom? Now, I'm not saying, I'm not an expert in Sears houses, but I've never seen a 5 bedroom original, but they certainly could exist. I just have never seen it. And when I've looked at the old advertisement, most of them are 2 and 3 bedroom. So this house could have been enlarged, but if it is a 5 bedroom Sears, what a great treasure for sure.
Yeah. Okay, and here we have a couple of more than one F. Scott Fitzgerald experts weighing in. F. Scott Fitzgerald's former home was at 599 Summit Avenue. And another person writes in, the brownstone that Fitzgerald lived in for a time was on Summit Avenue. There is a historical plaque in front. He was actually born in a house a few blocks to the north of the Summit Avenue home. And I want to just put in here that I have always heard a story that when F. Scott Fitzgerald finished the manuscript to The Great Gatsby, he ran down in the street and stopped the streetcar to say that he'd done that. And partly I assumed that the streetcar would have been running on Grand Avenue, and that's why I thought he was on Grand Avenue. Do you know anything about that? Maybe he lived on Grand Avenue too, or?
I thought it was kind of a brownstone apartment that he lived in for a little while. It could have been later. I honestly, I'm speaking a little out of turn here.
Okay.
And it sounds like we have some really knowledgeable
maybe our knowledge
there, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
And if there's a plaque on Grand, he obviously lived there for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe if someone in the audience knows more than us, you can sort of weigh in.
Well, that isn't hard. They can know a lot more than me, that's for sure.
Okay. Another questioner wants to know about St. Clement's Church on Portland, just west of Victoria.
That's the Episcopal Church I was talking about.
Oh, I got you. Of course.
The
of
Amelia
course, yeah.
Earhart Church, St.
This
Clement.
is the Amelia Earhart Church. Okay. Sure. Just like the monuments in front of the Capitol, there are homes of famous people who are somewhat controversial. Can you speak to how those are handled? I'm thinking of the Lindbergh House, but I'm sure there are others.
Well,
Is it?
keep
I'm
going.
sorry.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. No,
No,
you go
no,
ahead.
finish the question. I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's the question.
Yeah,
I was
you know,
wondering if the house is controversial or the person who lived there, and maybe
clearly
you
it's
could talk about
clearly
that.
it's the person that lived there.
Okay.
One of the things that I've always kind of taken a position on is I'm a historian. I don't use history as a pulpit for or against history.
Mhm.
History, I just state it as it is. I have opinions, but
Mhm.
I don't share them in a public
Mhm.
forum because I'll never be on everybody's side.
Mhm.
But I can tell you the Lindbergh story has been controversial. The Sibley story has been controversial. The
Sure.
Ramsey story is controversial.
Mhm.
And you can choose where you stand on that position. I stand as a historian. They're valuable as part of our story of history. And so
Mhm.
I don't get into the politics of it, but it's definitely not the building. It's always the person.
Yeah, it's the person who lived there for sure.
Yes.
Okay, and here we have a lot of F. Scott Fitzgerald experts in the audience.
Good.
The row house that Fitzgerald lived in is at 599 Summit. This person writes, but his birthplace is at 481 Laurel, so a couple of blocks
Okay, good.
away.
Good.
All right. Now, are you familiar, says this questioner, with the WPA housing development southwest of Austin called Austin Acres? Are you familiar with that
I
at
am
all?
not. I am not. I've done some work in Austin. It's a great town,
Mhm.
but I'm not familiar with that project. Austin Acres. I'm going to look into that. That's interesting
Mhm.
because I do an entire presentation on
Mhm.
structures and landmarks from the New Deal. It's called Going to Work. The program's called Going to Work.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm always looking for interesting stories related to this small chapter in our history, important chapter, but that's an interesting one.
Mhm.
Austin Acres. I'm going to look into that.
Were there a number of housing developments created during the New Deal era?
I I don't know. See, that's never been,
Mhm.
I've never read about them. I
Yeah,
read
yeah,
about civic, auditoriums were built,
right.
stadiums were built, sidewalks
Yeah.
were laid, um,
Mhm.
but not actual homes for people.
Right,
So
right.
that's interesting.
Okay. Well, we will have to have you come back when you've finished researching that topic.
Exactly. I love the
Unfortunately,
ideas for the
yeah,
next time I'm out on the road. I'm going to go down to Austin and ask and go out and take
okay.
pictures. That's
All
cool.
right. But for the moment, we are out of time. And so I am going to thank our speaker, Doug Omen. I'm going to thank Grayson and Carmi behind the scenes. Thank you so much to the audience. Everyone, please come back when we will welcome next week retired Star Tribune editorial writer Laurie Sturdivant. She'll be talking about a look at the Minnesota legislature 2023. I've heard this recent session has been referred to as a new Minnesota miracle. So if you want to hear all about what was passed in the legislature, this session, come back next week and Laurie Sturdivant will be here to explain all. But for right now, I'm going to say thank you very much, but bye-bye now.